Welcome to episode number 60 of the Debt Free Dad podcast. You know, I hear it time and time again. Brad, I want to buy a home because renting is just throwing my money away. But is it? And I say not so fast. There is more to this renting versus buying subject than meets the eye. And most people aren't looking at the entire picture. And that's what we're going to be talking a little bit on today's show. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Debt Free Dad podcast, where we're helping normal, everyday people learn how to save money and kick debt so they can live a happier and stress-free life. Now here's your host, Debt Free Dad, Brad Nelson.
Hey, how's everyone doing today? You can find me on Facebook, Pinterest, YouTube, and Instagram. Just search Brad Nelson, Debt Free Dad, and welcome to today's show. So I know on this podcast, we're on podcast number 60 right now, and I know we've had some, conversations that have been more debatable, things like credit scores and new cars, and today we're tackling one of those conversations, which is this whole renting versus buying. And guys, I hear this all the time, and I'm sure you guys have probably heard it, maybe even thought of it yourselves at one point, but, renting is just throwing away my money. And I know I did. In fact, I can remember, Mom, Ryan's my brother, and I can remember my mom saying sometimes that renting is just throwing away your money. But I look back, and I made that first house purchase in my early 20s, and literally I had no business even thinking about buying a house, let alone actually doing it. And I got to tell you, it was not, I learned a lot by fixing up that house, but from a financial standpoint, it was one of the stupidest decisions I made in my early 20s. It really was. It was not smart. And I'm just thankful because looking back, I'm like, man, if one thing would have went wrong, it would have been devastation. Like it would have, I had a house of cards I was playing with, and I'm just thankful that nothing did go wrong, looking back, knowing what I know now. But I don't know. What are your guys' initial take on this before we start diving into this conversation a little bit more?
Well, for me, I've never rented. I've only owned a house. I would have told you a number of years ago that, I probably was one of the people that told you when you were first buying your house that, yeah, you should totally buy a house. That's the right thing to do. Why would you rent? That's just crazy. I think, obviously through our getting out of debt journey, we've learned a lot. And so now, I still think buying a home is right if you're buying the right home and you're doing it at the right time and you have all the right things in place to be able to own a home. So I think it is, I think it's financially a good thing for you to do, but most people, including me, in the first couple of houses I bought were for all the wrong reasons at all the wrong time. And I had no money plan. I had no plan. It was just, I can afford the payment and buy it.
Yeah.
I always rented up until just this October.
Yeah.
So I have no problems with renting at all.
And how do you feel now? Because you did make the transition. You went from renting over to purchasing. And how do you feel about that?
I feel really good. And there were times where I really wanted to buy a house earlier. And especially even when we started paying off debt and I saw that momentum, I was like, oh yeah, we can probably do it early. We don't have to wait until we're done. And there were times where I was looking at those real estate listings and going, oh, I just want to do it. And I'm so glad that I waited, because had we not waited, we probably would have gotten more. Not probably. We would have went more into debt, because some of the stuff that's come up even just these first few months, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it's surprising. And I think it surprises especially a lot of the first-time homebuyers that are out there. Now, I've owned two homes in my life. The first one was this fixer-upper house that I bought. And like I said, it ended up working out. I ended up selling that and just barely breaking, we made a little bit of money off that to put on a brand new house that we needed, right? And when my first marriage ended, neither one of us could afford that payment. So guess what? They foreclosed. And let me tell you, that was not a fun experience. And luckily we were able to short sell it and get rid of it before that, foreclosure actually went down, but still not a fun experience at all. So I've had a slightly good experience, but was very broke buying that first house and then had an awful ending to it. And currently we're still renting. A lot of people are always shocked to hear that. Brad, you're a financial coach and you rent? Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about why we did that, because initially the decision was forced because we lost a house, right? Like no one else was going to give us a mortgage, right? So we only had to rent, but there's reasons why we kind of stuck with it as long as we have. And we're going to talk about those coming up. But there are some pros and cons to both renting and homeownership. But I think it's just clear, like Ryan said, I think, everyone's situation is going to be different. But the point of this episode is to hopefully encourage you to do a little bit of homework and not just listen to somebody say that homeownership is the best idea and it's the only thing that's out there. It's just not true. All right. In fact, I work with people who love renting. They love it. They want nothing to do with homeownership. They don't want to fix anything. They don't have to worry about anything. Like they love the freedom that they can just pick up the phone, call their landlord, and they just come fix it. Like, and that's totally fine. Like if you have that mentality and that's what you really want and that's part of your financial plan, I personally don't have any issue with that. Now, I'm kind of siding with Ryan and with Amber, who just bought a home, that I personally feel that renting is not necessarily a good long-term plan from a financial standpoint. It's not. We're going to talk about some of the cons to renting because there are some. Because I do think that there's tremendous value in buying your own home. But very much just like Ryan said, I think you've got to do it the right way. You've got to be ready for it. And because it's some big responsibilities, we're going to talk about some of those here, just kind of argue this other side of homeownership before we talk about the renting side of things. And the first point we want to make here today is that homeownership is not exactly always what it's cracked up to be, right? It's sold as like it's this American dream, right? And I think one of the number one mistakes that a lot of people make in buying a home is that they think it's an asset and that they're actually making money, right? But a home, when you actually think about a home that you own, it's technically a liability because it costs you money to actually own it. Well, what do you mean, Brad? Well, you have your mortgage, right? And because of that mortgage, you have an interest rate. You're paying interest to the bank, so there's a cost to that. You have to pay for insurance. You have to pay for your utilities. You have to pay for the maintenance and the upkeep, which averages anywhere between 1% to 3% based on the home's value for the year. So you've got to think about that the home itself is a liability and there's going to be a cost to it, all right? And it also is going to take income from your income column. Like when you think about your income, it takes money from your income. It doesn't put money into your income column. And that's why this turns into a liability. Now, long-term wise, is it an asset and can you make money? Sure. But where people make money on their house, what do they typically do with that? Ryan, you know better than most. What did you guys do with the appreciation and stuff that you guys realized in your house?
I bought a bigger house.
Yeah, right. So did you guys ever actually realize the money though? Like, I mean, did you ever see a true profit go into your income statement or your income in your income column?
Yeah, I would say the first house, kind of when the market went crazy, was that probably, I don't know, 2002. We were able to use some of the income to pay some bills. We kind of paid it, we did some things with it, but that was probably that's the only time. I mean, that's the only time that's ever happened to us because we had enough equity in the house to do it at that time. And that was only because we hit the market at the right time. I mean, had that not happened, the other two houses that we bought and sold, we didn't recognize any income. I mean, if you look at what we did to the house and all the stuff we had put into it while we owned it, then sold it, we probably came out negative in reality.
Right.
I mean, if you look at all the upkeep and money you spent versus what they gave, the check they cut me to put down on my next house, it was probably negative or a very close to break even point.
Yeah. All very good things and all great things for an episode coming up on home buying, right? Because those are all things you should consider. If you're especially buying a house that's a fixer-upper, how much money you have to put in versus what you could sell it for later. Those are all good things to bring up and things to think about if you're thinking about buying versus renting. Also, when we talk about assets, this is one that people tend to forget. If you don't own your home and you're paying a mortgage, check this out. It's technically the bank's true asset. Because guess what? It's putting money in their income column because what are you doing? You're paying interest, right? So now you understand, why does the financial industry push homeownership so much? Well, it makes them money, right? Yes, of course they want you to buy a house, right? It makes sense. Now, let's talk a little bit, again, why homeownership eats income. Because it's not just mortgage, interest, insurance, utilities, and upkeep. And Ryan, you just talked a little bit about, before we recorded this podcast, a figure that you guys have for some upkeep, but you have to think about upkeep. You have to think about maintenance. I just did a podcast recording with a couple who's going to be on, and they shared that they bought a house back in 2017, and it ended up costing them $30,000, and they didn't have the money, and they went into $30,000 in credit card debt to afford the upkeep and the repairs on the home that they purchased. So again, if you don't have a substantial amount of money set aside or some sort of money set aside for repairs and costs, there's only one place to really go, and that's further into debt.
We bought our house, it'll be 7 years, going on 7 years ago. And I just, before our show today, I kind of just did a quick, this is by no means 100% accurate. And I would say it's going to be on the low end from everything we've spent, but just on the major things that we've done, it came out to about $26,000 in the last almost 7 years. And so when you kind of say 1 to 3% of the home's value, I mean, that is right in that sweet spot of, it's probably in that $4,000, $3,000, $3,500 range on the things I added up. And that doesn't even include, who buys a house and is like, I don't want new curtains and I don't want to ever do, all the little things that you end up doing, along the way, I want this new end table for $200. If I start adding all those things up over the next 7 years, it's easily over $30,000 we've spent. Just on maintaining and upkeep, water heater went out, appliances breaking, carpet that was in here when it came, we had to get it replaced. Your home is an asset in the long term, but if you don't keep it up, then it becomes a real problem when you go to sell it. Yes, the market's great and I can get X, but if you don't keep that house up and you just let it go because you don't have the money, it's not really worth X anymore because no one's going to pay top dollar for a house that needs a ton of work.
And Amber, you just went through all this buying your house. You guys, obviously you didn't have to do too many repairs, but you guys have had costs when you've gotten into this place.
Well, yeah, we moved in knowing that we had to replace a furnace and there was a couple of other things that we wanted to do that didn't have to get done right away, but we just figured we'd do it. So we upgraded big things like our furnace and our electrical panel. And we've put in already just 4 months, I guess we've been here. And we put in about $12,000.
Right.
But we planned for it. Had we walked in the door and not planned for it and the furnace broke at minus 30 degrees Celsius, we'd be in trouble.
And that right there is what I hear time and time again from people that I coach. It was all of the stuff we didn't plan for that's causing the financial stress on some cases, right? And that's where a lot of debt comes from. It just comes from a lack of planning. You got to understand when you own these types of things and an asset like a house, this is a big responsibility, right? Things are going to break. Think of your car. We all know you're going to need tires. We all know things are going to break. We all know they're going to need brakes, right? But how many of us really have money set aside in a sinking fund to pay for car repairs? Not many. Right? And same thing when it comes to a house. You really, really need to be mindful of that. And this is one area, in my opinion, and again, I want to be very clear. Amber, you'll know what I'm talking about. But when you're talking to realtors and loan officers and people about buying houses, this is one area that they don't talk about all that often, right? And this is the area that you need to protect your own financial future because you're the one going to be responsible for making those repairs and the upkeep and making sure you got the money to pay for some of those things. They don't care. They just want to make sure you can make the payment, right? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, that's their job. Their job is to sell you a house, sell you a loan. It is not their job to necessarily look out for your overall financial well-being in the future when SHIT hits the fan, right? So
they were more than happy to give us much larger mortgage than we took.
Right.
More than happy.
Exactly. So again, something that you may want to consider if you're thinking about, is renting a complete waste of money versus home buying. These are expenses that you're going to want to consider. The other thing you want to think about too is you don't want to get yourself in a situation where you're house poor. And I see this too, where a lot of people will just put a tremendous amount of weight on owning a home. It's their ultimate goal. And it's a great goal. There's nothing wrong with that. But what they do is they put that goal above a lot of other things, like being able to save regularly in their emergency fund, save for investing for their future, being able to live the life they want. They find out real quick, wow, we got ourselves in this house. Yeah, we can afford the payment, but looks like we're having a lot of staycations, right? Because we can't go anywhere because not only do we have to pay for this payment, but now we got to pay for the upkeep and all the stuff that goes with this house. And they soon realize wow, I can't do a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do, or They're choosing to do it, but how are they doing it? They're going into debt for it, right? So again, it's just that vicious cycle. These are going to be the things that you're going to want to consider, whether you're going to rent or whether you're going to do those home purchases. Then the last one is a big mistake people make is they think about just the monthly payment, right? That's it. They just think about that monthly payment and what they can afford. But check this out. Homes have nearly tripled in size since the 1960s. That is fascinating to me, guys. Tripled in size here in the United States. So what does that mean? That means, if you're buying a bigger house, you might be buying a bigger house than you need. Maybe you've got unused rooms, right? Maybe you've got rooms that people just barely even go in. Is that really the best use of your money? And then, of course, if you got more rooms and more space, what are you going to fill it up with? More stuff, right? We spend more money on stuff coming into our life just to fill up a bigger space. So again, these are all going to be things that you're going to want to consider as you say, one, do we buy a house? And two, what kind of a house do we look for? Because again, it's not all just about that monthly payment.
When we bought our house before this one, it was a bigger house, and we didn't think anything about. Yeah, I mean, we thought like, it's got an air conditioner for upstairs and downstairs. That's really nice. Until you get the bill in the summer when it's 90 degrees every day, or the fact that the place we moved to, the water company is crazy, and our water bill was $150 a month for water, because they, it wasn't. We just didn't. All we were so focused on was that payment. Can I afford the payment? We weren't looking at anything else. And a lot of times too, the other point, I wanted to make is, a lot of these people too, you're taking out these loans and you can afford the payment, but then you're spreading it across 30 years. Most people are doing 30-year mortgages. And especially during those first 5 or 10 years, I mean, you're not paying much principal off on that house. I mean, it's almost all going to interest. So if you turn around in 5 or 6 years and sell it, if it's appreciated in value, you may gain a little bit, but you're not gaining a lot of money from you paying down on that house. Your best bet is going to be a 15-year mortgage to really be paying down principal. Otherwise, you're just, if you're moving every 5 to 7 years, you're really going to be in a tight spot.
Yeah. I remember the when we bought the brand new house, and I can't recall what our interest rate was. It's not as low as they are now, but I want to say like 4 or 5%. It was a 30-year. But I remember, you go to pay your taxes and they send you what you paid in interest. And it was like for the year, it was like $10,000 to $12,000 in 1 year, just interest. I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? And again, all great conversation, Ryan. You brought up a good point about the 15-year versus the 30, and we'll have to do a whole show on home purchases and what makes the most sense. But we're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about the renting side of things now. Like, why isn't necessarily renting a waste of money, right? We're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of renting coming up here. Hey, if you love planners, this is for you. But you know why planners frustrate me? Because they only really get it half right. Now, sure, they're really good and fancy about helping you manage your time, which is really important, obviously. That's what a planner's for. But where they get it wrong is money, the second most valuable resource in our lives. Most planners don't include any financial planning, things like, keeping track of paydays, bills, due dates, spending, yearly expenses, budgets, cash flow planning, debt elimination plans, and goal planning, right? None of that stuff. That's a real pain. And then what? Then you got to create your own in some silly binder, right? And who has time for all of that stuff? So instead, what happens? Nothing, right? A lot of people tend to ignore their finances even more, and things only get worse. Well, that all ends today because I am so excited to announce and release my brand new, totally awesome Debt Freedom Planner. This thing's awesome, by the way. Now, before you say, Brad, I've already got a planner. This is not an ordinary day planner. This is the Debt Freedom Planner, which is a companion tool that works with your day planner, and it's built to help you manage your money, pay off more debt, and melt away financial stress. And I believe this is the tool that a lot of people who want to take control of their finances have been waiting for. So head on over to therealdebtfreedad.com, click on the Debt Freedom Planner in the menu to get access to your planner today. Hey guys, we are back. Today we're talking about renting and how it is not always the worst sin you can make, right? So and as I mentioned when we opened the show, we're currently renting, and I want to talk a little bit about how renting has helped us. And again, I want to just be very guarded against this. I completely understand that renting does not work for everybody, depending on what we're going to talk about reasons why here coming up. But how it's helped us specifically, one, we rent cheap. And by renting cheap, it helped us quickly be able to pay off debt. And we've been able to save a considerable amount of cash. I haven't dove deep into this conversation yet on this show, but we had a daughter, our daughter Avery, about 2.5 years ago, who had some complications at birth, and there was a tremendous amount of expenses that went along with that. And all I got to say is that I'm thankful that we were renting during that time, because if we were owning a house, I think the situation could have been much worse, just because from a renting standpoint, we didn't have to worry about the liability of fixing things and having the home expense and all of that kind of stuff. And we look at other areas of our life. My wife had an emergency gallbladder surgery, which ended up costing us about $10,000 out of pocket. We ended up having a tax oops in our income when we did our taxes a couple years ago. We ended up having to pay an extra $9,000 in income tax that we weren't planned on. We didn't have to go into debt for that. We had a plan for it, right? We were able to take money, move things around, make things work. So by renting cheap, we've been able to do a lot of cool things. One of the coolest things, we pay ourselves first, meaning that when we pay ourselves from our businesses, the first thing that gets funded are our dreams, our savings, the things that we want to work on. And then all the bills get paid last. But when we were broke and we actually owned homes, it was the complete opposite. We weren't paying ourselves first. We didn't have a savings account, right? Pretty much all of our money went to that mortgage and all of the credit cards and the car payments and all the other stuff. But by renting cheap, we kind of reversed that. And it's really helped us not only just build our savings account, but also get us to financial freedom as well since we've been here. Other thing that it's helped us do is it's helped us open our businesses, because we didn't have the liability of owning a home. We didn't have to worry about the repairs. And since we've lived here, because we've lived in this house now for coming up on, I think it's like 7 or 8 years now, they've had some major repairs that they've had to do. They had a fence completely get knocked out. They had to completely repair a whole entire fence. They had a huge plumbing issue here that they had to get taken care of. Like, there's been multiple things here that they've had to come do. Now, if I owned this house, that would have been money that I would have had put into it. But since we don't own it, guess where I've been putting our money? We've been putting our money in investing into our businesses, starting podcasts like this and growing this. And what does that do? It helps us build our income, which is a true asset. And that, if you can increase your income, guess what? The more cash flow into your monthly budget, the more stuff you get to do and the more dreams you get to realize, right? So by renting cheap, it's really helped us grow our businesses and the lifestyle that we live now. All right. Now, we are currently looking at purchasing a home, and we don't know exactly when. We're going to take our time with it because we're going to focus on a lot of things that we've talked about on the show. I don't believe a home is the most important thing in my life. I want to be able to do other things like travel and camp and be able to vacation and be able to have peace of mind. And I don't want a home to take that away from me ever. It's just not worth it to me. So we're being very smart and we're going to be very patient. Also, the home market is like really crazy really right now where I live, and I'm not willing to jump in at full price. I want a discount. I want a deal. So if I've got to wait a little bit longer, I'm going to do that. So that's how renting has helped us. So if you're someone who's out there who's been getting beat up for renting, listen, I'm like your best ally because I don't think it's necessarily always the worst thing. All right. Now, when you're renting, there are some things that you want to consider, like location and market is key. All right. Now, I think this is where most people make the biggest mistake when renting, is that they start to rent in a high cost of living area, or they rent in an area that is like a facility that just has high rent because it's got cool amenities and things like that. Right. I'm not a big fan of that type of renting. I look at rent, again, as the stepping stone to the next big move I'm going to make. So I would not suggest someone to go out there and say, hey, you know, they typically recommend 25% of your take-home pay should be reserved for your living expenses or for your mortgage or your rent. When it comes to rent, I would suggest try to be as low on that as you possibly can. The lower, the better, because what does that mean you can do? It means that you can pay off debt faster, you can build your emergency fund faster, and ultimately, you probably do want to buy a house, you can save up for your down payment. But if you're absolutely maxed out to capacity on your rent, it's going to be really hard to move the needle on your savings to get you out of renting and into homeownership. So it has to be kind of like that fine line. Now, some people who may argue with me on this might say, well, Brad, you know, I live in like a big city and it's cheaper to buy a house than it is to rent. Well, yeah, in your situation, you might be right. Right. But then I would also consider the upkeep costs, the maintenance of owning that home, and then really look at the math and see, is one really cheaper than the other? The other thing I would suggest is that you may have to move, right? And I've talked to people like that. They live in really expensive areas and they just can't afford it. And it's like, look, like you can't get out of debt because of where you live. Like your living expenses are just astronomically high. You need to make a change. And if you can, you don't have to do it or not, but if you don't do it, like unless you want to work 80, 90 hours a week, like there's just no way that we're going to be able to make this work. All right. So I think renting, location and market is going to be, I think, number one. If you can find a place that's safe, reliable, good landlords, and you can rent as cheap as possible, man, I'm all for it. And I think if it's part of your financial plan to help you save and get out of debt, I think it would be great.
Well, talk a little bit. I mean, I'm just curious because I mean, I think that's one of the, as you're kind of talking through your example and stuff, and we're kind of walking through this. I've never rented, but I know when we looked into it, or you hear all the time, like, well, I mean, if I go rent a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house, it's going to cost me more than a mortgage would. And I think, the key is, especially if you're in debt and, trying to figure this out, is we're not saying to, and I don't think you're saying go rent a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house. Maybe you're going to have to find a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, and it's not going to be as nice. And, maybe the rent is going to be a lot less. I know that you really want the nice house, but, if maybe now's not the right time. I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Absolutely. I think you have to go into renting with the attitude of this is going to be a little bit of a sacrifice. And we have lived that sacrifice for 7 or 8 years. We live in a small house. It is technically a 2-bedroom. We have another long, it's kind of, what would they call it? Cape Cod style, where it's got like the walk up area at the top. And we have our offices up there because we both work from home. So by the time you add in our businesses to this little house, and then obviously our 2 kids and a dog running around here, right? It's tight. And it's not always easy, especially with COVID and my son's home doing homeschool and, doing virtual school and stuff. It's not easy. So yeah, I recommend, you're going to want to sacrifice. Like I would not recommend renting the top of the line place. I would suggest scaling back. We live in a less ideal area. We're further away from the main roadways of getting anywhere. So that's a pain in the butt, right? The house isn't exactly all that big, but we've got great landlords. So when stuff gets broken, they're typically here the next day to fix it. So again, you have to weigh the pros and cons, but yeah, the more you can sacrifice, lay on location and amenities and size, like the more you can feel a little pain, the better off you're going to be when it comes to renting and just going in it with the attitude of this is going to be temporary. And admittedly, our family, Sarah and I, we're feeling the pain of our decision. We really are. We're getting at that point where it's like, oh, can we keep doing this, right? Like we've endured for a long time here, and it's helped us really get to where we are. So it's like, but we don't want those emotions to take over and make that decision. We've got to remain smart and diligent to the plan and be patient. And it's hard. It's hard because there is that human side of it where, I would like more space, or I would like my kids not being on top of me all the time, right? And just having a little breathing room, especially because we work from home all the time. It is a little bit of a challenge. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So a couple of other things renting can do for you is that, obviously, you don't have to worry about the upkeep and the making the updates, because obviously that, they do that. Landlord does that. You get freedom and flexibility, right? So you can move whenever you want. That's one of the cool things that I like about this is like, if we just decided, we don't want to live here anymore for whatever reason, within 30 days, we could be out and we could be off to someplace else. Like you don't get that flexibility with necessarily buying a home. Now with the market being as hot as it is, you might, right? You might be able to sell real quick, but when the market goes down, it's not always like that. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer to sell, and it's obviously a little bit of a different process than, say, renting from one place to another. All right. Also, I suggest looking at possibly renting if you're looking at paying off debt. If you're looking at building your emergency fund, and you have debt that you already have that you need to pay off, like I don't think buying a house is probably the best thing that you should do. If you're already feeling some financial stress, it's probably not that next step. I would suggest focusing on how we can pay off the debt and then making that house kind of the next thing. And that's exactly what you did, Amber. I mean, you guys focused on getting your situation straightened out, and then you guys made that move, and it's been, like you said, it's been awesome.
Oh yeah. Had I not met you or done any of the steps I've done, we would have been in trouble because we were on our way to buying a house. Like it was happening, whether we were in debt or not. And we just happened to stumble across your course, and I was like, oh, this changed our life. But like, it's crazy how much we were able to do because we were renting. because we didn't have any extra payments. We didn't have to worry about the taxes going up or anything like that. It was just flat payment every single month, and we knew what it was. And then we were able to take all of our money and invest it in ourselves.
Yep, absolutely. And so if I looked at like the perfect example of how to do it, Amber and Paul would be that example. They were patient. They were diligent. They did it the right way. And now their home is going to remain a blessing. And that's exactly the way that you should look at renting. It's not a bad thing. It's just that stepping stone. There are also some just quick cons to renting. I just want to mention these. Number one, obviously, you're kind of out of control with some things. Your rent can go up, right? Your rent can go up. Now, we're thankful in the last 7 or 8 years, our rent has never gone up. Not one time. Which is rare that happens. So we're just counting our blessings that it stayed the same. But your rent can go up. You can get bad landlords. That's another one, right? So if you're renting from a place that, the landlords aren't necessarily diligent in getting things fixed, or they ignore phone calls, like that can be a really bad experience. And I've worked with people who have been in experiences like that. So you want to be careful with some of that. So just as much as they're interviewing you, you also want to be interviewing them. Like, is this going to be a good place to rent from, right? There's obviously no tax advantages, and you definitely aren't going to get any equity from renting. And that's where the whole, you're throwing away your money attitude kind of comes from. And then lastly, like I said, you're just not 100% in control. So, if you're like, for instance, we live in a house that's owned by an individual. If they just decided to say, hey, we're going to sell it, we'd have to be out in 30 days. So there is some uncertainty there. So when you're renting, you want to have kind of a backup plan for that. Like thinking about, hey, if we have to get out of here, like we want to have an extra security deposit and that stuff in case we got to rent another place. Like we want to make sure we've got some backup plans. So again, I think we've gone over some of the kind of the big points. And again, I hope you feel like if you are renting or considering home buying, like these are some of the things that you should just consider. And if you do have to fall back to renting, I have people that just beat themselves up for it. And you don't have to. Just look at it in a smart way. And again, as that stepping stone to making that next decision in your life.
Hey, what's this sightseeing? I thought this was a party! Let's dance!
All right. That song means it's time for the celebrations of the show. And today we're kicking it off with Becky. Becky says, I actually sat down and wrote out all of my bills and tried to create a budget. Ended up with 3, and I don't like any of them. But I'm glad she tried. That's awesome. Big steps for myself. Didn't eat out at all. Made my own coffee. Normally, it's a stop at Scooters, which must be a great coffee place for her. So I could get an espresso shop, but I didn't. Big steps. Next on the agenda is finally doing an actual budget and a list of all my goals towards my financial freedom. Those are just some amazing wins, especially as you get started. So congratulations to you.
Amy Lane, in January, I paid off my payday loan for $497.25, saving me $72.25 each payday. I also paid off one flex loan for $534.74, which saved me $65 a payday.
That is amazing. Get out of those payday loans is crucial. So good for you. That's a huge win.
Lacey Love, this week I put another $500 in my savings and $700 towards debt. I also completed my eating at home challenge. This month I only spent $296 on food. I typically budget $900 for food, so we saved over $600 by eating the food we already had in the freezer, fridge, and pantry.
That is amazing. Save $600 just in 1 month. That is impressive. So if you're out there looking, hey, how can I build my emergency fund fast or pay down some debt just in 1 month? $600. That's awesome. Holly Plantley, $200 in the savings and $400 towards debt this past week. Congratulations to you.
Jessica Novak, another habit change. I only had $32 left in the grocery budget yesterday, so I went through my list and prioritized what we actually needed for meals that I had planned. Did we have anything at home I could sub for anything on the list? And when I got to the store, had my list in one hand and a calculator in the other to stay on track.
That is awesome.
Love that.
That is amazing. And then last but not least, Debbie Hayden paid $1,600 towards a credit card. That is an amazing win. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us here today. We love your feedback, and it also helps us grow our YouTube show. So please give us a like or leave us some honest feedback on this video. And if you want the latest from the show, obviously be sure to hit that notification bell and subscribe to our channel. And for the latest resources, or if you want more information on how to kick debt and financial stress, please be sure to check out the links in this video or head over to therealdebtfreedad.com. We'll see you guys on an upcoming show. Take care.